Hello everyone to episode 10, the big 1-0 for average Ontario anglers. What do you think of that, Jesse?
It is a milestone that is insane.
Double digits. So this episode is going to be all about carp fishing. We have a guest actually this week.
Ooh,
who will be
a
showing
secret guest.
Secret guest, which Jesse may or may not have announced earlier, so it's not really a secret.
It's not a secret.
So we'll be having him on after the interesting fishing fact, answer some questions that we've curated, and then Jesse will also be asking even more carp questions after that from you listeners who posted them on our Instagram. So to start off our episode 10, we have an interesting fishing fact from Jesse, and we'll see if it's interesting.
Oh, this is super interesting. All right, Andrew, I have a question for you for my interesting fishing fact. 85 years ago, a French engineer named André created what iconic and best-selling lure?
The MEPS.
Correct. The MEPS aglia, which actually means in Latin, interestingly enough, butterfly. But when that thing spins, it looks kind of like a weird sinking, swimming through the water butterfly, I guess. That's why they named it that. And it is, apparently, they say, the world's best-selling lure.
I can see that.
Yeah,
I
for
know
sure.
I own more than a few of them.
Oh, for sure. And they catch fish. Now, these lures became so popular that by 1960, they had already sold 500,000. So that was 85 years ago. They started it. And then by 1960, they already sold 500,000 in the USA alone. That's it.
Wow.
Now, they started making MEPS in a small back room. Now, if you're a guy starting a business or a girl starting a business, you can start in a small back room, no problem. Just like this podcast is in a small back room right now. But later, they expanded to a 50,000 square foot factory. So, you have to improve a little bit.
That's our next podcast space.
Yeah.
We're just like running around
50,000 square feet. Now, the cool thing is they have dozens of blade colors, tail colors, and sizes. So with all those combinations together, MEPS actually makes over 4,000 different combinations of their spinners, which is pretty cool. I know probably Andrew has probably about half of those.
Maybe.
Now, I thought that an interesting part would just be something more funny. It's not really, something that you'd be like interesting, but this is a funny part. So we all know that MEPS makes, tons of spinners, but they have the dress tail spinners. And I'm sure we all have one. It's squirrel hair.
Black Fury is like,
Yeah, a classic, right?
Yeah.
So they have the dressed squirrel tail feathered hooks. Or they may have some feathers in there too. And they're so popular that MEPS is always looking for squirrel tails. That sounds weird, okay? They always want squirrel tails. And in fact, there was a huge wooden sign at the factory in Wisconsin, and it literally was a huge sign outside the factory, and it says in letters, "Home of MEPS." And then underneath in huge block letters, literally the size of like a human being, it says, "Squirrel tails wanted."
I want that.
Yeah.
I get a cottage up there. I'm just going to throw that in the front door. Be like, "Welcome to Andrew's cottage. Squirrel tails wanted."
And apparently they said that they do like factory tours at MEPS, and they say that they get a lot of random people that just, they don't know what the heck is going on. They don't know what MEPS is, but they come to the factory for the tour because they're wondering what squirrel tail, like what are you going to do with squirrel tails? Because,
Chicken nuggets.
Ugh. So they actually have a program for hunters to send in their squirrel tails because they tie so many of them. Again, they tie like thousands and thousands a day probably. What would you say is the price of an average squirrel tail? So like say you acquired a squirrel tail, how much do you think it would go for? It's not as much as you think.
25 cents.
25 cents, that's correct. 25 cents for a fully usable squirrel tail. And it's 12.5 cents if it's subpar, which is pretty funny. Like, I didn't know how much a squirrel tail is going to cost.
Now, I kind of estimated, like, full honesty here. I have heard about the squirrel tails before, and I was looking online, and there's actually price tiers.
Yes.
And I don't know if you're going into that. But
a little bit, yeah.
It's like, oh, here's like you get so many cents for one squirrel tail, or if you bring 100, it's more. Like,
yeah.
Who's collecting 100 squirrel tails and having them not like rot away before they bring them into the factory?
Exactly. And I actually have a little bit of the process here. I'm not going to go fully into it, but their squirrel tail program, it shows how to submit your tails, which is, it's funny. Like, we don't live like, down in the wilderness where maybe shooting squirrels for food is like a thing. Like for us, we think,
I've had squirrel. It was good.
Okay, so there. So like for me, like I think eating squirrel is kind of hillbilly-ish. If you're offended by the term hillbilly, please unsubscribe.
I guarantee you, anyone who's eaten squirrel is not offended by the term hillbilly. They're like, that's a badge of honor.
Exactly. So what do you do when you get a squirrel tail, however you acquire it? Also, just to note, MEPS literally says on their website they do not encourage you to kill squirrels just for their tail. These are for squirrels that are being harvested for food.
Yeah.
And then the tail obviously is used as well.
One of the things, too, which I know because I saw it in a TV show a while ago, just as a little side note, syrup area, like maple syrup farms, they have an issue with the squirrels chewing through the sap lines. So they have to get rid of the squirrels because we all love our maple syrup here in Canada. So we want to keep that going. So we got to stop those squirrels from chewing on it. So that is another reason why they're also harvested.
Interesting. So yeah, no offense to squirrels, but these spinners are good. So what can I say? So this is a little bit about the process I find interesting. Right. So they recommend on their website, when you get a squirrel, however you acquire this squirrel,
roadkill,
do not remove the tailbone. So just straight tail, It says salt the butt end generously. Okay? Now if you've gotten that far, delicious. Make sure the tail is straight because a bent tail cannot be used. So don't send MEPS no bent up janky squirrel tails.
The tail's got rigor mortis in the ball.
Yeah. And they tell you the best tails are taken after October 1st. I guess it would be like, the bushy winter tail.
Yeah.
And that's what they want. And it's funny to look on the website. It actually has pictures and shows you how long the fur has to be and all this stuff. And the funny thing is you can actually choose, so they'll pay you, but you can also choose payment of trade for lures. So they'll actually give you a credit towards lures, and then you ship them the tails. They ship you some spinners with the squirrel tails on them. So you can literally just recycle the squirrel tail again and again and again. And so that's kind of the interesting fishing fact. I thought it was funny because probably everyone that has fished or has had someone in their family fish probably owns a MEP spinner. Yeah. And they're literally the world's most best-selling lure, and we've caught tons of fish on that. I know everyone has a story about catching fish on MEPS.
Every single time I get a vintage tackle box with some lures in it,
always MEPS.
Always going to be a MEPS in there. You can guarantee. Oftentimes it's the Aglia that has the minnow on the back end with the stinger treble hook on it.
And one thing I'll have to say is like this is if you look on MEPS, the USA website, they have way cooler lures than we have here in Canada, unfortunately. They have like really cool stuff that you can't even find up here. So if you ever want to check out some cool lures, just check out MEPS.com and check it out.
Or if MEPS wants to sponsor an episode and show us some of your cool American baits we can't get here, we're not going to say no.
Anyway, that was my interesting fishing fact about spinners and janky squirrel tails. So hopefully that gets a good rating from Andrew. He funny story, last time I did an interesting fishing fact for Len Thompson, he gave me like a B-, and I had probably like half a dozen people message me on Instagram and be like, Andrew was really harsh with your rating. I thought it was more of an A, and I was like, yeah. So I hope Andrew learns his lesson and gives me a better grade. What are you thinking?
First of all you Jesse supporters out there, I've never been known to cave under pressure, so anything that I rate will be honest. That was an A+. I absolutely love that.
I know Andrew. If it has to do with squirrels, he's totally in.
They're the hairiest of rodents in Canada.
Yeah. Anyway, that was the interesting fishing fact. So now we're going to hand it back over to Andrew for the main topic, and we're going to introduce our guest.
Yes. So we have with us Andrew, as we often lovingly refer to him between ourselves as Carpy Andrew. There's an Andrew here, a.k.a. me, and there's Carpy Andrew. You have to differentiate somehow.
So we're going to call Andrew and Carpy Andrew Carpy Andrew. Did I lose you? Anyway, so because Andrew's going to perform this interview, I'm going to step off, and we're going to invite on Carpy Andrew.
Well, hello, Andrew. How are you?
Hey, and doing all right. How about yourself, Andrew?
I'm good.
Sorry, I should say Carpy Andrew, so the listeners don't get confused.
Thank you.
Those watching on YouTube, you'll know that I have a mustache and he has more facial hair. So you can differentiate that way. But if you're just listening, then the sultry tones you're going to hear from... Go ahead.
Carpy Andrew.
There we go. Sounds slightly different to just regular old Andrew me.
Yeah, so thank you guys for having me. This is going to be really fun here. You guys got some questions for me, I see, here today.
I do, yeah. So first off, I wanted to talk about, regarding carp, when do you start fishing for carp? When do you start fishing for carp? Let's start off with that.
You can start fishing for carp like pretty much the best time is late April, early May. The fish start to come in shallow. You know, April showers, they bring May flowers, but they also bring in carp. The nights when you want to focus around above 9 degrees, 6 degrees at nights, the carp will really start to eat and come in. And especially overnighters, you can do really well come late April. Nice. So that's like probably the earliest anybody can start really successfully targeting them.
All right. So that's kind of when the bite is on. So they feed before their spawn. Do they feed during their spawn and after as well, or?
Yeah, so they'll eat all before spawn, and if you can find them, sometimes even earlier than late April, you can have some really good days. Usually, they eat right up to the spawn. They don't eat during this spawn. Sometimes they'll take a break from spawning, and you'll actually see them eat their own eggs. Carp, they get really hungry, high protein. You know, they take the opportunity, it's there, and it sounds kind of messed up, but carp aren't the best parents. After spawn, they eat their babies, they'll have their spawn, and then they just leave. They're like the only fish that doesn't really take care of their babies, really, on a bed or anything. So it's kind of a free-for-all.
Where do you find carp? So generally, if you're fishing pre-spawn, let's say, so in late April, early May kind of thing, where are the carp going to be?
Late April, early May, they'll start pushing up shallow. They'll start pushing up into about 6 feet of water, you know, closer to like 10, 12 feet of water. But really, they do start pushing shallow. You'll find them even 3 feet, 4 feet, just on the right day if it's sunny, you know. They've got a mind of their own. And you think every time you go out, you try to relate it to a previous session you had. But every time it's a new experience, almost.
So if they're coming in shallow, I guess they're staging for their spawn as they're coming in for the pre-spawn. So where do they spawn? Like what areas are they kind of heading to so we can narrow the search down for when you're looking for them?
Yeah. The best places to start to look in late April, early May would be like marshy, you know, carpy looking areas that we would call it there that have really good access to the main lake. So a lot of the fish will be pushing in from the main lake and shallow, right? And it's hard for them if it's not wide open, etc. And so you really can time it after the rains. They'll help as well. And marshy areas after the rains will be really prime, especially river mouths, you know, mouths of like marsh entrances. And that's really where is the best time to focus in the spring. There's not too many other places. After the spawn, they'll branch out into deeper summering bays with weeds and all that stuff. And you can, in the summertime, get them pretty deep.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if you're just kind of starting out carp fishing, so let's pretend like I was about 5 years ago. I fished bass, I fished pike, and I didn't have a lot of money to put into. I didn't have any money.
Right, got to start somewhere.
Put into another genre of fishing. So what would you say you could start, like bare bones? What could you start fishing for carp with?
The best things to go for, I would started when I was young. I wasn't a big gearhead myself and all that, you know, like even now I'm still learning about all this new technology you're seeing with these rods and reels and even are still advancing. I would recommend, if you're not going for any carp specific brands, like any medium heavy like Shimano or Daiwa rod would be fine. Medium heavy around 9 foot, 9'6", 10 foot, just because carp fishing, you know, you don't know if you're going to cast 10 feet or 10 yards or 100 yards. So having like that perfect all around rod was medium heavy, 9'6", it'll get you out there pretty far. You could pair it with like a size 4,000 reel, size 4,000, 6,000 reel of any like a Shimano, Daiwa, but there's a few like carp specific brands if you are looking for them. I know JRC, I think Jesse here might have one of their rods. Daiwa Black Widow is a very entry-level carp brand of stuff, and they make what I've seen the whole line of stuff, even cradles and other specific things. Yeah.
So essentially, if someone if you want to go carp fishing, you could generally take your longest rod you have, most powerful rod you have, combine those two, and like let's say a lot of carp guys will use, it's called a bait runner or bait feeder reel. So that essentially is 2 drag systems. So the regular drag that you have on your standard spinning reel, it's either on a knob on the top or on the bottom, and as a fish pulls off, it's creating resistance as you're fighting the fish.
Right.
But the bait runners, they have a secondary drag that you can engage. So your bail is closed, but it's a very, very light drag. So when your bait is out there, a carp can come along, pick it up, and then you can start swimming away with it with very little resistance.
Yeah, rod is.
Yeah, so if you see the videos online of the rod bouncing on that stand, that's because it has a bait feeder system. But do you need, like, again, you're starting out, you're not going to spend, I know you can get some budget reels, but let's say you have no money like I did. How can you kind of start going for carp then if you don't have a bait feeder reel? Can you use any reel?
Yeah, so just make sure any reel that you use, like I said, size 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, is just loose. Set it up so it's loose. You don't want your rod flying right into the water. I've seen it. I've literally seen it. I've heard stories of it. It's happened. So as long as your reel and your drag is set loose on pretty much any reel you want to grab, it'll be good. It'll be okay for carp size 4,000, 6,000 plus. Yeah.
Nice. Because I know even myself, when I was starting out, what I would do is I'd leave my spool open, but I just set like a small rock, like a small smooth stone on top of the line. That way, the wind's not going to blow it off and just going to drift away. But as soon as the fish takes it, it just pops off the rock, and you have to watch your rod because there's no alarms, there's nothing that that a carp's on. But,
very carpy.
But yeah, it's something that you can do if you don't have a bait runner, something like that. You can still get out there. And one of the a lot of guys do it is they use a center pin.
Oh yeah,
reel totally. Rods and reels. So if you're a steelheader, and that's a more expensive combo than you're probably gonna have to use for any carp setup.
Yeah.
But if you already fish for steelhead, and let's say the steelhead, they finished their spawn early and they're gone, and you still want to do stuff in the spring,
right? Great opportunity.
Set it up for carp. You can still use your center pin, leave the whole setup pretty much exactly the same.
Yeah, and I've seen it.
A bit heavier leader, and that's about it.
The fights are crazy, totally different on the center pin rods. Like the fish is almost in control the whole time, and you're hanging on for a ride. It looks like. I've never attempted it myself, but I've fished with other guys very closely, and it looks like a blast, man. Center pinning. If you steelhead fish and you're looking for something else, like Andrew said, to fish for between the gap of when bass and pike are still kind of close there, carp with center pin is a blast. Yeah.
And if I know a lot of the steelhead guys, they can be purists. So
yeah.
If you like fishing steelhead because of the great fight, guess what? You're gonna love carp fishing. It's a completely different style of fight, but you're in for one heck of a ride on a center pin, and you hook into a 20-pound carp.
Yeah. I've recently seen carp, man. I've been fighting them, and they've been jumping out of the water lately. They jump out of the water, try to shake the hook left and right, and then they land. And I think it's just the smaller ones that mostly I see do it, but very interesting. They're almost acrobatic is what I'm trying to say, like a steelhead or something like that, which I've never really seen too much before from carp. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we have our again, you can use whatever rod you have with you, but the longer the better, and the heavier the better, generally speaking.
Yeah, medium, heavy rod, 9-foot, 10-foot rod, yeah.
So if you're starting out then for bait, what is a very effective and cheap bait? I'm kind of leading you to a certain answer here on this one.
Yeah, you can use corn, maize, even from the store. You can buy from PV Mart, I think it's called now.
Yeah.
And they sell corn there, animal feed. It's basically an animal farm store. So that's like the best place you can look for large bags of corn. But I also fish with boilies. So like boilies, they are more of a food source for the fish, and it helps keep them in the area. So when you're fishing, you can crush up a couple boilies, split them in chops, they're called, split them in half. And, you can throw them out when you're fishing, but if you come back, like if you plan on coming back in the evening or the morning, before work, after work, etc., whenever, you can throw in a ton of boilies, which is keeping the fish feeding, and they'll remember that there's actual food in the area rather than just eating the corn and the maize. I do sell my own boilies. I have been starting my own line of boilies and pop-ups and stuff like that slowly. I've been rolling them out, and it took a lot of years of working into trying to get them right, but I've caught a lot of fish on my own bait, and it's a great feeling. It's fun to make too if it's a winter hobby. Like I don't ice fish too much, it gets really cold. And I just make bait. I focus on fishing, tie rigs, and all that stuff, and it's been fun. It's been a blast. Yeah.
Perfect. Another thing too with corn, what Jesse and I started out with for a long time that we had success with was getting a can of sweet corn from the grocery store or from the dollar store. It's like $1.25. You get a can of sweet corn, and we just throw like a couple handfuls of corn out, and you can even rig. We'll talk a little bit about rigs in a second, but we just put a couple like kernels of corn on just a small steelhead hook or slightly thicker gauge than a steelhead hook, and you can actually get carp hooks themselves. So again, if you have everything, all you have to buy is a can of corn, maybe a couple egg sinkers, and some good carp hooks, and you are now set up and rigged to go for carp. That's the most basic setup I could think of.
Totally. I agree. Just like you said, a hook with corn, and it's even still effective sometimes when it's colder and the bite or the water's colder and the bite from the fish is a bit lighter. You'd be surprised at how well corn on a hook specifically will outfish a hair rig. It's happened before. It's just due to, like I said, the way that the fish are feeding, and the water is very cold with the bite, or they're even feeding very weary because they've been pressured really early, etc. Yeah.
So you mentioned there a hair rig. So for people that are familiar with carp fishing, that's probably the rig that you hear the most about. For those of you who don't know, what's the what's the design first of all of a hair rig, and then what's the principle on how it works? Because
that's a really good question. The hair rig is used for carp fishing because of exactly the way they feed. Their mouth is a huge feeding mechanism, a filter feeding mechanism designed to spit out objects they don't want, like your hook.
It's aggravating.
Yeah, it's happened, right? You're sitting there, all of a sudden you get a run, and then it stops, and you're like, oh, well, he dropped it, he had it. So that's what the hair rig is designed for. It's designed to hook the carp in a specific way because their mouths are designed to spit things out, usually in the corners of the mouth or the bottom of the mouth, and that is the optimal hook hold for a carp during a fight. Usually when you lose a carp, it's not because you did something wrong, but it's just because it was probably hooked wrong or very lightly. You ripped the hook out, etc. So a hair rig is designed to improve with the whole hooking mechanics. That's a whole other chapter of rig mechanics and rig functioning. That's huge. Yeah.
So to hopefully describe it, I'll do my best to describe it for those who haven't seen it before or haven't heard of it. So a hair rig, essentially it starts off with your main line coming from your rod. You're going to have a weight that's going to hold your bait down at the bottom. And then you're going to have a swivel after that, or generally use a swivel just to attach from our main line to the hair rig, which we tie our own out of braid.
Yeah, they're really easy to tie, really cheap, really easy, really quick to tie. Yeah.
So you have your braid now, which is essentially the start of the hair rig. The braid goes forward. You tie on. It's almost like a snell knot on the hook, carp hook itself, and you leave a long tag end, and you tie a loop onto the end of that tag end, and then you thread corn kernels onto that long tag end that's hanging off the bottom of the hook. So your bait is actually after your hook. It's if you fish steelhead, or you know how you fish a bead where you have your bead and then a hook. Yeah. It's the opposite. You have your hook and then you have your bait after. But the carp, they'll come over, they'll vacuum everything up off the bottom, and it's designed when they pick it up, they spit your hook out. It's designed for them to spit it out, and that's why the carp hooks are so like insanely sharp. So it pricks it on the way out of their mouth, and then they start freaking out. They shake their head or they bolt, and it'll hook into the side of their really like rubbery mouth.
Hockey puck. Like.
And that stuff. That's the design of the hair rig, is because they're feeding that way. It's actually designed to hook them when they're spitting out your hook.
They, like I was saying before, you can use corn straight on the hook, and I've even seen guys, because with the hair rig, like you said, you tie the long loop and all that stuff, using a small corn hook with corn, you can't get that much corn on it. So what I've seen guys do is they'll just use the hook and they'll thread it all the way up past the hook, a little bit up their leader.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they'll have like a few pieces of corn on the hook, and then they'll put up 10 pieces of corn instead of just 3. And
interesting,
because you've got little fish that are sitting there picking away your corn, gobies and catfish and all that stuff you don't want to catch,
crayfish.
yeah, even that, it lets you present a lot of corn really easily without using a hair rig.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So next up, we'll kind of go to the next stage of, maybe you've gone carp fishing with your gear once or twice. You started to like it and you want to invest a little bit of money into it. what would be some of the first things you'd recommend someone to buy if they're, again, not that they're crazy serious about it, but they want to get proper gear for it? What are some things that you would recommend? Maybe not even brand specific, but just kind of items that they should look to get.
The first thing I would get, jokingly enough, we were just talking about it, is a cart, a wagon. Something to pull all your carp tackle with you.
And your chair.
And a chair, tackle box, the net, their rods, and all your buddy's stuff if he's coming with you too. It's great. It's underrated. It's underlooked. It might even seem silly to a lot of people. You know, what's this guy pulling a wagon fishing for? Why do you need all that stuff? But let them think that, you know, you be the one catching all the fish. That's the first thing that I would get.
And
that
it's
will
your
help.
comfort on the bank too.
And comfort is going to help you catch fish. That's all I was going to say. It's you're the one on the bank fishing. You need to be comfortable. Some people have other needs, you know, rather prefer getting alarms and stuff like that first, which you don't need right away. The wagon is going to help you go to your spots. It's going to help you go catch the fish, all that stuff. Next would mostly just be a fishing rod, because for years I thought that, you know, it doesn't matter. You can just use a medium heavy rod, 9 foot, but that's not strong enough for these larger carp that we have in Lake Ontario that I've hooked into, and some of them I've landed. I landed a 38 and a 35 pound carp, and I've got a 3 pound test curve rod, which in America would be the equivalent to just like a heavy rated rod. And that was probably like pushing it for that rod, surprisingly enough. I would recommend 3 pound, 3.25 pound test curve, but like I said, if you're targeting those larger carp, go 3.5 pound, 3.25 pound test curve carp rod for sure. And I know Sonic makes a lot of really good entry level carp brands. They're more of a European brand at the moment, but a lot of our American stores do carry them, and they've got like $100 rods in all varieties, all ranges. Their Vader range is really good. I've got a few of their Vader range products from Sonic, and they're really great starting out entry-level product.
And another thing too I'd recommend would be a bait runner, purely for the fact of when it has a second drag, even if you don't have a bait alarm, which again your line runs through a bait alarm essentially, so when a carp starts to take it, it's beeping at you. So it's a nice audible, sometimes visual, they have lights on it to help you know when you're fishing at night that something's going with it. But even at bare minimum, if you can get nice entry-level, like I still have my Okuma little like bait feeder reel, and I think it's a 3000, and again it holds a lot of line. The carp are going to go on a long run, so that bigger spool, bigger drag system, heavy duty to be able to handle that. You also now have that bait feeder system, so you'll hear like it has a drag clicker in it, so you still get, it's not as loud as like this loud alarm beeping at your face, but
loud.
it's still audible, which is great. And then like I was saying, comfort on the bank, you're not constantly on edge, like, is my rod going? Is my rod going? You'll know when it goes. And it was a game changer on my enjoyment of carp fishing, because I was no longer on edge. You could really relax until all of a sudden this like burst of adrenaline and there's a fish going and you run and grab your rod.
That's the best thing. Whenever you're not paying attention, that's when you catch a fish. That's when they bite. It's always when you go to use the bathroom, you hear, like you said, you can hear it go, and it helps if you're not looking for alarms. That was a great advice. Yeah. And
Jesse and I, the other thing too I wanted to mention is carp is an amazing social fishing sport.
Yeah.
So when Jesse and I go, we'll often go, we can manage a couple hours, 2-3 hours maybe after work during the week. And you go there, it's perfect. The evening bite starts to come on. You go out there, you have a coffee at night.
Yeah.
You're sitting on the bank. You have your rods sitting there. Sometimes if we catch nothing, we've had great conversations. We just have hung out for a couple hours.
Yeah, honestly, I've had some sessions where you're just talking with no fish, and they're more memorable than when you do catch fish. So I agree.
And another thing that Jesse and I do, because when we go with either just ourselves or with friends, this isn't something that all carp anglers do, but Jesse and I, we take turns. So we'll have our rods sitting on the rod pod. It's called, which is essentially a rack to have your rods with your lines in the water waiting for a bite. Or you can just use a regular stick with a forked stick. You can use that. That's not a problem.
Old, reliable.
Again, go budget.
Yeah.
And then you have, you're sitting on the bank. So the first rod that goes off, whoever's rod that is, that's their fish. But the next fish that comes along, no matter whose rod it is, will give it to the other guy. And that's awesome, because now you catch one fish, you automatically know, okay, like this is a good night. a second fish, the other guy also has a good night. So
Right.
it's fun, and you're not out anything because you're out there just to have a good time. You caught a fish, let the other guy have it. It's just as fun being like the
Yeah.
net man watching them fight this thing.
There's been times where my buddies have been like, "You're more excited about this fish than me," and they're the one catching it. So I agree. It's a great social sport if you're into it, but it's also great if you need to pull back from everyone and go alone and relax. And I've had some of the most memorable sessions alone. More so environmentally, like just with the sunsets, the animals, and all that stuff. You really take it in more when you're alone. So both. Carp fishing is great for people who want to go alone and be really social.
I know Jesse and I can attest to hearing animal noises, especially where we fish. We'll often hear the coyotes.
Oh,
And they're like across the river, and there's like 70 of them.
yeah, they're coming to steal your fish.
So the last question I had for myself for you would be what to expect. So again, if someone's first time carp fishing, are you 100% going to get a fish? Like what are you expecting to have on someone's first outing? Like they don't have a guide, they're out there, they have a good idea where there are carp. What should they be expecting?
Expect nothing.
That's good advice.
It's very hard. So unless you're targeting carp when they're up shallow in the spring, May and June, in 2 feet of water, it's very hard targeting them. But like Andrew said, if you know there's carp there, still expect nothing. Yeah, just go with the intentions of having fun and learning. Every time you go out fishing is always a learning experience, no matter if you're 2 years old, 20 years old, or 40 years old. You'll always learn. There's so many fish. There's so many habitats. They're always doing different stuff. Just go with the intentions of, like I was saying, relaxing.
Yeah.
Or go with the intentions of being social with some friends after work. Be open-minded about learning and blanking, catching nothing.
It took Jesse and I a few times to kind of figure out what we were doing with carp. And there on YouTube now, there's a lot of different videos. Like carp fishing is huge in Europe.
Yeah.
Now, if you're never done carp fishing and you watch those videos, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the rigs they're setting up, their whole setup that they have on the banks.
Sometimes even watching the massive, vast waters they're fishing into.
Yeah. Take that with a grain of salt, because a lot of the waters that you're going to be fishing carp around locally, they don't have to be that big. They don't have to be that daunting. You don't have to use that gear and those rigs. But you can learn a lot of, watch them for, where they're targeting. They have a lot of just instructional videos on, this is why I'm using this. This is why I'm using this kind of bait. This is how much I feed. This is how much I chum. This is all these different things. So if you wanted to get into it, you can learn a lot from that. I know you have some YouTube videos up yourself.
Yeah, my YouTube videos show very well the process of just simply showing up to the lake, baiting up, catching a fish, and then just redoing it again and being successful with it. So if you guys want to check them out, my name on YouTube is commonly Carpy. Yeah.
So that's, I think, wraps up my questions. The last one I wanted to mention, you did talk about an online store, so that you make your own boilies and stuff like that. So if anyone's interested, where is the best way to talk to you, either locally, or if I know we have some viewers and listeners that are average Ontario anglers. Ooh. So where can people find your stuff?
If you guys are local and know me in Canada, Ontario, I ship. If you want to DM me, I ship all over the place. International orders can be placed online, but if you know me in Canada, feel free to DM me anytime. I will read them, and we will totally get in touch about getting you some baits. I make pop-ups. One flavor right now called Old Reliable, and I have 2 flavors of boilies, for loose feed, of almond maple and fishing garlic. Those 2 are my staple. I've done really well already this year on them. Fishing even back in March was good, and then April was really good with them. So definitely shoot me a DM anytime. And then for international orders, I have an eBay store that we can definitely throw a link to.
So that is about my time for this episode. So we're going to invite Jesse back on, and he's going to ask a few more questions from our Instagram audience.
Awesome.
And
cool.
we're going to put you on the spot for that.
Ooh, I'm nervous. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah.
All right.
Hello, Jesse.
How's it going?
I'm good, man. How
I
are
kicked
you?
Andrew not Carp Andrew. I kicked Andrew out of the seat. So we asked a question on our Instagram. Ask a carpy question to a carpy angler.
Oh, okay. I think I saw that up there.
Yeah.
Did you guys get some good questions there?
Actually got quite a few, and
Cool.
we're not going to cover them all because if we covered all of these, it would be like a 4-hour podcast.
Wow, good for you, man. I appreciate the interest.
Yeah, so we have some questions here from a bunch of different followers on Instagram. Again, if you follow us on Instagram, Average Ontario Anglers, we oftentimes post stories with questions that get featured on the podcast as well. I was going to say, shout out your Instagram there, Andrew.
It's commonly Carpy. My Instagram on all social media platforms is commonly Carpy, just as it would be spelled as it's sounded.
Exactly. And if you want to look at a guy's account that is chock full of very carpy pictures, a lot of people will talk about fishing and you'll look at their account and you're like, you don't really know what you're talking about, do you? But if you look at Carpy Andrew's Instagram account, it is chock full of hundreds of pictures of carp. This guy knows what he's talking about. That's why we have him on. All right, so here's some of the questions. The first question is, where do you rank them in top fighting fish? And this question was asked by Connor Slyford.
That's a good question. I would rank them top 3 freshwater fish you can catch in Ontario. You got salmon, which are pretty close. You know, it's a bit of a different fight. Carp are right close second, I think, in my opinion. They have a little bit less stamina, but during the fight that they do put up, it's just like a salmon. Like it's just all hell breaks loose.
They bulldog.
Yeah.
And they're smart.
And they do really smart things. Like I was mentioning earlier with Andrew, like recently they've been jumping out of the water and trying to shake my hook out of their mouth, which I'm not used to seeing too much from a carp. So,
and I noticed too, like, I know a lot of people, there's a stigma that carp are just dumb, but it's been proven that they're actually one of the more smarter freshwater fish. And I've noticed we fish this one area that has a lot of dock posts in it.
oh yeah.
And the carp know, they literally know when you hook them to wrap the line around the dock post and snap you off.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. And you're like, how do they know? Like, they're intelligent. How do they know that?
They know
they're smart
immediately.
Yeah. So yeah, they're not only strong fighters, but they're smart fighters. Here's a good question. It's a little bit more advanced. So best rig for fishing in heavy weeds.
I would definitely use just a chod rig, it's called, or a stiff hinge rig. They're both basically the exact same rig, just fished with a different lead system. So one is on an inline weight system, and then one is on a helicopter lead system. But they both use the same chod rig, it's called.
And doesn't the stiff hinge rig, it holds the bait up?
Yeah.
As opposed to the bait being sitting on the bottom.
Yeah, so what it'll do for you is you use one floating pop-up, and you can tie the chod section, it's called, to however long you want. And I've even caught fish like 6 inches off the bottom with a chod rig in weeds, off of weeds. That is my go-to rig for weeds. It's a chod rig or stiff hinge rig.
Because it's interesting. You may think, oh, carp, they have a good sense of smell. They'll be able to smell your bait and find it in the weeds. But it is more, they do have a good sense of smell, but they're
lazy.
They're
They don't
lazy and
want
they're
it in the
visual. They
weeds.
can see. So
Yeah.
that's why oftentimes the pop-ups are a bright color. Sometimes you'll notice they'll be like pink or white or a fluorescent color. Help them find it a little bit. So
Yeah.
definitely look it up. The stiff hinge rig. I know you've tied me some of those and they work really good.
Yeah.
Next question. This is a good question. Someone asks, winter, late fall carp? Question mark.
It's possible. I have a couple spots where guys are definitely pulling them out in the winter. Fall time is amazing. First week of October, all throughout October is amazing. Depending on the year, maybe last week of October, but they will come back to the exact same areas where they spawn most of the time in the fall. And a lot of the steelhead and trout fishermen, they'll even catch them like roe bags at the river mouths.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's definitely possible.
I noticed that too. Like we'll fish an area for pike or bass in like maybe like October-ish.
Yeah.
And we'll have like huge schools of carp just going underneath the boat in like 5 feet of water.
Yeah, doing the crazy shallow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're just, feeding up for the winter.
Yeah, they're there. It's possible.
Another question we got here. What's the weirdest bait you've ever used?
That I've caught or not caught on?
Oh, either one.
I tried using hot dogs for carp and caught catfish. I've tried using candy, just for fun. All sorts of things, but none of them successful. I should definitely try that more. That's a good question. I'll definitely try more weird things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think not the weirdest for me, but I think one time I was trout fishing in a creek. I was like not steelhead fishing, but
Yeah.
fishing for stream trout. I actually made it closer down to the lake, and I actually saw a bunch of fish, like a pod of carp had moved up.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't have any carp stuff with me. I just had like a bunch of spinners and stuff.
Right
But I
on.
did have a peanut butter sandwich with me.
Oh,
So I took a piece of the crust. It was just like Wonder Bread, I
Yeah.
just took a piece of the
Perfect.
crust and I put it on the hook, and I actually managed to catch one.
awesome, man.
And it was like on a
Wow.
6.6 light action rod and like 6-pound line.
wow.
And it took me forever to get it in. And it was funny because bread is hard to cast. I didn't have like any.
You just free-lined
I pretty
it?
much just like free lined it out, and the
Yeah.
thing just happened to be feeding, and it just like nosed down, sucked the bread up.
Oh,
and I set
that's
the hook.
so carpy,
Yeah,
man.
it was like amazing, and it's I think not a weird thing, but I've had a lot of people tell me, oh, you should try them on the fly, like fly fishing.
100%.
I actually have, and it is extremely difficult. It's probably one of the hardest ways I've ever fished because everything has to be perfect. You have to get that fly like right in front of them, but not too close or else they'll spook. And they have
Yeah.
to be like head down feeding. And it's just, I set a goal a few years ago to be like, I want to catch one on the fly.
That's really fun, man.
And
That's
several
cool.
times I went out and the conditions just didn't allow it. Other times you'd be good, but they just wouldn't go for it. And then the rare time it happened, maybe 3 times, I probably caught 5 in total on the fly.
Wow.
And it was so frustrating. Like you'd have a fish just, rolling in the shallows. You're like, okay, and you're fly fishing. You're trying to like cast in this little bushy creek and then finally get a fly in front of them. And they would just like go towards it and then just swim off, like not interested. But it was very frustrating. But if
Yeah.
you're looking for a challenge, I recommend trying to fly fish for them. You can use like a little woolly bugger, a little crayfish fly, but
That's cool, man.
it's a heck of a fight too on
Yeah.
a fly rod. But that's,
There's-
I guess, not on a weird bait, but
Right. No, definitely different. There's times of the years where fly will be effective, like way more effective than anything else. When post spawn, when they're still kind of up shallow, like sluggish and hungry, if you put a fly right in front of them, then they'll take it.
and definitely that's the time to do it because once they get deep, you're not going to be able to sight fish for them.
Exactly.
Here's another good, more advanced-ish question. How long should you bait an area before they start to come around?
That's a really good question. So don't give up. I've had the fish find my bait in 1 day. I've had them find it in 3 days. I've even baited up for 7 days. And then it was just
In a row.
7 days,
Yeah.
evenings in a row. Actually, when I met you, it took me 7 days of pre-baiting that area there.
Yeah.
And then there was just 3 weeks of chaos, just 2, 3, 4 fish an evening. It just took them 7 days to find the bait.
And they're smart. So once they find food, they'll check back on that area every day. But you have to get to that point where they find it
Yeah.
and realize, like you said, to use something a food source that
The
brings them
boilies.
back.
Yeah.
It's not just a snack. They figure out in their little fishy brain that is an area that has food.
Yeah.
And they can go back to it. And they're smart. And they'll come back. And it's funny, they'll actually come back at a very similar time every day.
Every
They
day.
have like a routine. They
Yep.
must hit certain spots where they know there's certain foods.
Yep.
So if you're a beginner, what would you recommend doing for chumming?
Like I was saying earlier, just a lot of sweet corn and then a few boilies. Depending on the time of the year, like I've fished with straight boilies and I've done really well come the summertime. But if you're just chumming and you want to chum every day for the fish to find it, just maize with sweet corn, just a ton of it. Feed them like pigs.
And they are pigs. They'll eat.
Yeah.
Like you said, like you can dump out a whole bucket of bait and they'll munch it up.
There's days in the fall, referring to the previous question, where I've gone through 22 pounds of bait in 6 hours, and then the bite dies because I've run out of 25 pounds of bait. It's crazy. When they're having a feeding spell, it's just madness. Yeah.
So a lot of these questions here that you guys asked, we actually covered them. A lot of people asking about gear, where to find fish. We covered that in the podcast, so we're not going to re-talk about them. I thought we could just end this little question and answer with story time.
Oh, yeah.
Me and Andrew love story time. So
I'm totally down.
I'm going to tell you a story, and Carpy Andrew here was actually there, so you'll be able to remember. So just by chance, one of my buddies who doesn't fish that much, he told me, he's like, man, I was walking my dog, I saw this spot, and I saw all these carp. And he's like, I saw hundreds of carp. And I was like, he exaggerates. I'm like, no, you didn't. He probably saw a few of them, and he thought they were hundreds, right?
Yeah.
So, what the heck? I checked it out after work, and I walked down, and it was kind of out of the way. It's a little spot. You never think about it.
Right.
And, dude, there was literally dozens and dozens and dozens of carp at this spot.
Wow.
Just randomly. And I was like, oh my goodness, right?
You're getting all like,
I
what do I do?
brought
What do I
a
do?
rod, so
Yeah.
I just, cast out. And in that first day, in 1 hour, I caught 8 fish.
Wow.
It was insane. Like, they were everywhere. They were like, just literally like, when you go to the Toronto Zoo and you look and all the koi are just coming up. It was like
the
that.
bridge there. Yeah.
So I legit, at this time, I didn't know Carp Andrew. So me and Andrew, AOA Andrew, and I think I went with him. I went with my wife. We went with Andrew's wife, and we had just days where we were catching more than a dozen in just a few hours. It was insane.
It's a great area.
Then I met Carp Andrew, and I was like, dude, you got to try this spot. So he's like, okay. And he was, you were like, okay, I don't know how good it's going to be. And dude, he went out there using, like, me and Andrew, we carp fish. We're not definitely advanced carp anglers. So Carp Andrew goes out there with all his, his rigs, his pop-ups, all the proper stuff to do it properly. And he smashed. I think one day you caught 20 in like a few hours.
Yeah.
It was insane. And I remember that one day you were there and you were like, oh, I don't know if there's any big fish in this area.
Durham fish.
You pulled out a 31. 31 pounder. And like, I know a lot of people over exaggerate the weight of carp. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. They'll be like, oh, I caught this 40-pound carp. And you'll look at a picture of it and you're like, dude, that's like 22 pounds.
Right.
But this was, I saw it on the scale. And it was 31 pounds.
Totally.
And it was a giant fish. Like, it was big.
It was very long and like lean.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't a whale, but it was just, it was
thick.
at least 41, 42 inches.
Give that thing a pat on the side. It was solid. It's like not hollow. And I think I left that day because it had gotten late, and I was like, dude, I gotta go to work. Like, I gotta get out of here. And you were just like, no, I'm staying. Their fish are biting.
That day, I stayed, like 20 fish.
And
it was
Andrew's
nuts.
like, I'm gonna call him sick to work tomorrow. It's like, all right. But anyway, I thought that was a funny story, but it just goes to show you that keep your eyes open. Carp are everywhere, like we said, and this is the time of year to start looking for them. You're talking like, in May, the water's getting a little warmer. These fish they're thinking about spawning. They're trying to feed up. And then they're shallow, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you get those nice warm nights at night, that's when they're coming in. And this is one of the best species of fish to catch if you're a shore angler this time of year, because it's so accessible. Like Andrew talked during the podcast, you don't need any specialized gear.
Right.
The bait is cheap. Go to literally Freshco and buy a pack of corn for 99 cents.
Literally.
And you're good to go. That's all you need. So hopefully we answered some of the questions about carp. Carp is actually one of the episodes that we had more than a few people ask us to do.
Awesome.
So I was happy to ask Carp Andrew here to come
I
on
really
because we
appreciate
fished
it.
together more than a few times and we've had some really good days.
Yeah.
And I've learned a lot from you.
Yeah. Oh, we've
about
had some really
techniques.
bad days.
We've had some bad days too. And that's the thing. Carp fishing is like that. It's good. It's bad. Sometimes it's bad again. And then some days you just have really good days.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to continue with Andrew just for the last part of this. But we're going to say goodbye here to Carp Andrew. Again, give yourself a plug. Where do we find you?
You guys can find me all social media platforms as commonly Carpy. I will put a link to my store. I will send it to Jesse. You guys can do whatever with it.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Cool. Yep. But yeah, if you're interested about baits, DM me, and all social media platforms commonly Carpy.
So it's commonly Carpy. Does that mean you don't catch mirror carp?
You got it. They're rare. I've caught a few, but everything I catch is a common carp here in Canada. So the name, that's exactly how it came to be.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks again for being on the show. Also, we forgot to mention, we actually have a secret little giveaway.
Yes, I do have stuff for a giveaway sponsored by me this week. You guys have a chance to win if you guys want to enter on Jesse's Instagram there.
Yep, and as you're listening to this, we're going to be doing a poll story on our Instagram showing you how to enter. And we're going to have a pretty much just a little box that's going to set you up. It's going to have some bait in it, some rigs that Carp Andrew has tied up for us expertly. A bunch of different odds and ends that we've picked up over the years, and we're going to ship that out to you. So
cool.
I'd like to thank you again for that, and hopefully whoever wins that catches a bunch of fish.
Yeah, I'd be honored. Thank you guys for having me, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Now we're going to invite back regular Andrew. All right, so we kicked out Carpy Andrew. He has left the building, just like Elvis.
Carpy Andrew.
Bye. Catch a fish for me. And welcome back. We have AOA Andrew, or
regular
Andrew with a mustache. And I have a cool little segment that we're going to end this with, and it's called Story Time.
Mark 2.
Part 2.
So I just thought I'd mention the first time I ever caught a carp.
Ooh.
Because Jesse and I had tried a couple times, never had success, not when I was with him at least. And so I actually borrowed, it was like middle of the summer, and he lets me borrow his old salmon rod, which I actually now own because it broke, and he just gave it to me.
Yeah, the tip broke off. I was like, here you go, new rod.
So that was I was using a salmon casting rod and just a regular spinning reel, and I didn't have anything set up for carp. I'm like, I know corn, but I didn't know how to rig it. So what I did was I had these big circle hooks because I'm thinking it's a big fish, I need a big hook. I put a full dew worm on that, had my worm blower, and started like inflating it in different parts of the worm because it was sinking too fast with this huge circle hook. And I was at this little creek. It's actually landlocked, like they had no access to the lakes from this little creek. It's a little like pond area.
I know where
of a
this
dam.
is, yeah.
And the biggest one there is maybe 15 pounds.
This is not connected to Lake Ontario at all.
No,
These are like natural, or not
Yes,
natural, but
these
resident fish.
Resident in this little creek.
Yeah.
And so there's this one side of it where it floods, and it's like 2 feet deep, just a sandbar. And so I'm just casting out this worm, and again, like, it's casting pretty far because again it's got like a 4-aught circle hook on this thing, and I keep casting. There's like 40 carp in front of me because again, this is a whole community of them. They have nowhere else to go, and so it's just like landing on their heads, rolling off. I'm getting super frustrated. I have no clue how to catch these things. And I was about to leave, and I cast out this one last time. This carp all of a sudden decides to swim from like 10 feet away, rockets over to this worm, sucks it up, and I set the hook. And I landed this, I think it was, I'd estimate maybe 10 pounds.
Yeah,
And
I think so.
Yeah, that was my first carp I ever caught. Fought it. I had to land it, and then a strange guy came up. He's like, "What are you fishing for?" I'm like, "Carp." He comes up, and he takes a photo for me, and the photo was absolute trash.
Yeah, it happens. It literally happens, unfortunately. That's a funny story. I'll tell you the story, not of my first carp, but this is just a memory for me. I find it funny because people on Instagram message us and they're like, "Oh, I like your guys' stories." Again, there are stories, so we enjoy them, but I'm glad some of you out there enjoy them. But I'm going to tell you a story about, I used to fish a lot with my dad growing up. He was a trout, he liked stream trout fishing mostly and bass fishing, but he didn't really carp fish. But we found this one area that regularly had carp, and it was actually in a creek, and it's in the same area you'd be trout fishing. But every so often these fish would push all the way up from the lake, like way up, where you'd never expect them to be when the water was high, and you could catch them from the bridge, like right on the road. Like, you know, like you'd be like looking off the side of the road, and you'd see like 30 huge carp cruising around. My dad's like, "Oh my goodness, like here, get like a trout rod." We'd just have trout rods, and you know, I was young, and you couldn't really see from down on the bank, so my dad would just be like up on the bridge just dangling a worm down, and then every so often a carp would just, you know, suck the dew worm right up. He'd set the hook, he'd be fighting this huge, you know, 20-pound carp from up on top of the bridge, and then I would run down. I was like literally,
the bridge is like 20 feet above the water, too.
Yeah,
like you're not landing
no,
a
you're
carp
not
from the bridge,
and
there's no like
there's all
path
these
down
snags and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I was pretty young, so my dad would be like, run down, so I'd run across the bridge, run down in all the mosquitoes and my rubber boots. I was like 12 years old,
slip on the mud inevitably,
and then my dad would literally throw the rod down. My dad has very little respect for equipment, but he would throw the rod
that was
down.
a Canadian Tire $40 special too,
and it would land like in a bunch of grass, and I'd pick it up and I'd start fighting the fish. And 9 out of 10 times we'd lost it because of all the snags and, you know, the bridge pilings and stuff like that. But every so often we got one in, and I was 12 years old, 13. I'd so stoked, like, "Oh, this huge fish," and my dad's always like, "It's a carp, you know, whatever." But then I'll tell you the funny story, if he's listening, which he probably will. My dad would be like, "I'm not carp fishing," but he'd be like underneath a bridge with a bunch of corn. I'm like, "What are you doing?" You know that meme? It's like, "What you doing?" "Nothing. Just hanging around." But I thought it was pretty funny because like it's good for everyone. Everyone enjoys it. It's good. Like Carp Andrew is saying, sometimes you just need to be alone with your thoughts, so to say, so you can think about stuff and just decompress from the work week or the stress of your life, and just sit there and hopefully get a bite. And again, one of the most exciting things can be when it's just still quiet, and then you just hear or bring bring, or whatever bells you can buy, bells, buzzers. Like, it'll just be flat quiet, and then all of a sudden all heck breaks loose. Yeah. This is a family G-rated podcast. All heck breaks loose. Anyway, a good podcast.
Yeah.
Actually, our next podcast, just to whet your appetite for next week, it is shore fishing. So we're going to talk a little bit about carp, but not as much.
It's like an offshoot of carp fishing because it's primarily done from shore.
Yes, but we're also going to talk about other species like walleye, panfish, bass, that kind of stuff. And next week, we actually have a pretty fantastic giveaway. We're going to talk about that more next week. So again, like I mentioned, if you're listening to this podcast, check out our Instagram. We're going to have that carp fishing giveaway where we're giving away a bunch of Carpy Andrews bait, a bunch of rigs he tied up, a bunch of weights, all kinds of cool stuff that you're going to need for carp fishing. If you're just getting into it, it'd be fantastic to get that and get started. Or if you already have some stuff, you can add to your collection.
100%.
So
that's awesome. I think we've covered not everything to do about carp fishing, but the basics. So I think if you listen to this, you're armed with what you need to at least start trying to catch these carp.
100%. And if you have any questions, shoot us a message on Instagram. But really, if you have any questions, feel free to message
Commonly Carpy.
Yeah, commonly Carpy. I was going to say Carpy Andrew. That's what I know him
You
as.
search it doesn't come up as that.
Check out Commonly Carpy's Instagram. He's a legit guy. He'll literally answer your questions for you. And he's not going to, tell you locations. We won't either. But he'll tell you how to find fish, what areas to look for, and what kind of bait. And if you want to buy some of his bait and support him, that'd be fantastic too.
I think we need to pressure Commonly Carpy to change his name in that profile to Carpy Andrew.
Yes.
Just so that people will be able to find him when they search it inevitably.
If you're listening to this and you want him to change his name, send him a message and just say Carpy Andrew with a thumbs up. That's all you need to do. Thanks, guys.
So thank you very much for listening, hopefully all the way to end of episode 10. So we look forward to many, many more episodes. Thank you all for watching again. If you have a chance, we'd love to get some reviews. If you can rate us on whatever you're listening to us on or watching us on, rate, review us, and subscribe. That'd be fantastic. We love to get as much feedback from our listeners as possible, and that's a great way to support us right now in the meantime. If you have any questions for us, like Jesse said, you can reach out to us on Average Ontario Anglers. We like to hear from our listeners and give some feedback, or get some feedback, I should say. But thank you very much for listening. Hope you all have a great day. Tight lines.